This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
Welcome to Unspun. Why is Washington broken? And where does North Carolina have the greatest opportunity to grow, compete, and better serve its people in the coming year? Tonight, we'll ask that question to U.S. Senator Thom Tillis. Tillis has served North Carolina at the state and federal level, and he knows how to get legislation passed in both. That makes him uniquely positioned to discuss what politicians should prioritize next. Plus, I'll unpack the top 5 divisions in the Republican Party that politicians won't talk about, but voters need to know. And we'll get real about how hard it is to be an independent thinker in politics. In today's America, welcome to the Spin Game. Believe me, I know, I'm Pat McCrory. When I was governor and mayor, I played the Spin Game. I was played by the Spin Game. But aren't we all done being spun? Let's take the spin out of the world we're in, here on Unspun. Good evening, I'm Pat McCrory, and welcome to Unspun, the show that tells you what politicians are thinking but not saying. North Carolina stands at a political inflection point with an open U.S. Senate seat on the 2026 ballot in a state already being called a battleground. After voting against President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, U.S. Senator Thom Tillis announced he will not seek re-election in 2026. Tom, appreciate you coming on Unspun again. Thank you very much.
Good to see you again, Pat.
First of all, the question and theme of our show is, we'll tell you what politicians are thinking but not saying. What are senators thinking but not saying in D.C. right now? And let's start with the Republicans.
I think they're concerned about the environment next year. They should be, if for no other reason than the off-year election after a presidential election. But there are other headwinds that they have to take a look at. Some of that's the health care policy that I underscored in the H.R. 1. It's officially not called the One Big Beautiful Bill. That was taken out of the title. It's called H.R. 1. And it had health care provisions that are going to create headwinds. And I think we're starting to see the Democrats using that. So that's probably the best example of things that they're thinking but not saying. I feel like we need to address it. I believe that it's fixable between now and then, and we can make it a non-issue, but it means that we've got to step up and recognize we have the challenge.
What are the Democrats thinking but not saying?
I think the Democrats are thinking their party is going crazy, and that the single greatest risk they have to taking advantage of what should be a negative environment for Republicans is sending people like AOC to Tennessee and Texas to campaign for Democrats, because that liberal, progressive, far-right Mondami AOC vision is going to be rejected even more so than some of the challenges that we have with the voters right now.
So what I get you saying is the Republican senators behind the scenes are going, what are we doing as Republicans? We better be worried. And the Democrat people like yourself are going, not Democrats like you, but your Democratic peers.
They're saying, what are we doing?
What are we doing?
They're afraid of primary challenges. So both parties right now are worried about primaries. They're not really worried about generals, and their behavior is just the exact opposite of what their instincts. Their instincts should be, when one party moves too far or too close to their pole, that's the time to move, in our case, to the center right. Then you own the issues. But if both parties go to either extreme, then it's a jump ball.
But the Senate didn't used to be like this. The House has always been like this, at least for in our lifetime.
Yeah.
The Senate, statewide races. But now you can almost predict which Senate races are going to be in play, and therefore the logic is they're more worried about their primary.
Yeah, I think so. And I also think that, we're talking about races over the last 10 years that have dramatically changed. Almost all races are nationalized now. And it used to be just a handful, but now with social media and targeting and all these entrepreneurs out there making money, taking donors' money, and not really putting much lead on target, but they're creating messages and they're creating headwinds for candidates that make it very difficult in some cases for them to win a primary. And it's just the opposite. You have a primary prone. If you have a member that's at risk of losing a primary in a purple district in this cycle, that's going to be a real challenge. I hear a lot of people talking about challenging Republicans for not being purist. And I think that that's at the risk of probably getting an unelectable winner in a primary. We've got to watch out for that. That's how waves happen, if you take your eye off that ball.
Well, I was an example when I ran for U.S. Senate how much a Trump endorsement meant, at least back in 2022. I mean, and I had no idea. I was blindsided by it. Does the Trump endorsement still scare the Republicans in a possible primary at the Senate level?
I think at the Senate level it probably does. Primary, it comes down to turnout. In North Carolina, since we have open primaries, and states that have closed primaries, game, set, match, and states with open primaries, probably a little less so.
Now, a lot of people have told me, well, Tillis is saying what he wants to say because he's not running for re-election. I've never seen you do that. You were Speaker of the House when I was mayor, when I was governor. You've never held back any time. And I've always been impressed by you. Even when you were mad at me, you didn't hold back.
That's always been what's made me laugh about these people. I read it to somebody at Boone on Friday. And he was saying, I really like, how you've opened up over the last year and a half. And I had a reporter a year or so back when I was doing some of these bipartisan bills say, when did you have this revelation? He was basically asking how I had this revelation became bipartisan. I said, you really have not spent a lot of time looking at my record, have you? Because if you had, you would have known my first big bipartisan bill was 6 months into the state legislature. Hey, look, I'm a pretty direct person. You and I had a couple of disagreements. I do think I overrode 2 of your vetoes. But anyway, let's let bygones be
And you're undefeated
bygones.
and running for office.
Yeah,
you remind me of these often. But I was right and you were wrong. That's the only difference. So President Trump has been attacking you lately, and you have voted with President Trump probably 90% of the time, but the 5 or 10% of the time you haven't. Tell me about those interactions, the phone calls and from both him and the staff. Tell me the dynamics about this.
Well, first, we ought to go back and think about what attacked means. He may have said I was grandstanding. I never read the Truth Social. I think he said I was grandstanding. If you take a look at things that he's said or names that he has called people, I think it was probably pretty mild. But probably the most important thing people need to know in North Carolina is President Trump and I have a great relationship, but it's on our terms, each of our terms. I've communicated with him sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. We talked just last Saturday. We have a good relationship based on mutual respect. And I have made it very clear to the president that I believe he has a lot of people advising him that are not particularly interested in his legacy, and I am. He's a Republican president. I'm a Republican senator. I want him to be successful, and I'm not going to knowingly let bad advice go unchecked. I'm going to give him my advice. He's the president of the United States. He can make a decision ultimately. But I'm not going to hold back and make it seem like a good idea is a bad idea if I can look around the corner and try to help them out.
So who's giving him bad advice? You talk about him getting bad advice. Is that within the White House? Are there individuals?
Yeah, there are. First and foremost, there are a number of people. Susie Wiles, I'm so glad she's there. She's a good steadying influence. But there are people that I'll be focusing on in the remaining time that I'm in the Senate to call them out for what I think is bad advice at a place at a time of my choosing. But it's just very important for me to make sure that the president's successful, to make sure that we get a majority back in the Senate.
Is it bad advice based upon political hardball, on ideology, on pure politics? Why the bad advice?
I don't think, Pat, when I was a management consultant for the majority of my career. I was in management consulting longer than I've been in politics. Management consulting is all about executing. So when you have that experience and then you come in and you're a legislator, you're a Speaker of the House and you're a senator and you understand legislating, it just gives you a unique perspective that I try to offer people. But you got these 30-somethings and 40-somethings that are advising the president, and I really don't believe that they care much about his legacy. They care about how this wave gets them to the next one as they surf through their career, and they're the ones that I have a problem with. Most of the cabinet level picks, save 1 or 2, are great. They're doing a good job. You don't see them in the news because they're doing a good job. But there are people around him that need to be held accountable for decisions that they've made that I believe are having the consequence of headwinds that we can avoid if we just get things right over the next few months.
Okay, you've got health care coming up, which is a total mess. There's no easy solution.
No.
I mean, I know this as a governor. There is no easy
Obamacare created these problems. Obamacare created these problems. We have tried to fix Obamacare, and it has become so ingrained in health care coverage for about 25 million people. We've got to fix it. We're not going to, if we just have a precipitous withdrawal of providing a health care solution to people now who have become dependent on policies that they can get off the exchange, I think we're making a mistake.
All right, real quick, who are the coalition of senators who are come in a room and get over the hump to make this happen? Because you know the two extremes won't do it. Who's going to come up with a solution? Are there 4 or 5 senators that will get in the room and go, we got to pass something?
Yeah, there are, and I'm a part of that group. The question is whether or not the Democrats are prepared to do the right thing. This is this next year in the Senate is going to give me an opportunity to see if Democrats are prepared to do what I and a dozen other Republicans have done, and that's be bipartisan. They never have been. I've been there for 11 years. I've never seen them walk the plank on a tough issue where they vote with a majority of Republicans. If we're going to fix health care, they're going to have to demonstrate that they will be bipartisan. They will take the tough vote, and they will get things done.
And they've got pressures from the left, not to compromise.
And it's not like I didn't have pressure from the left when I did Respect for Marriage, Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, Electoral Count Act. I could go on, but the point is all of those were minority Republicans voting with a majority of Democrats. Now it's time for Democrats to prove that they can be bipartisan. A dozen or so of us have.
All right, the political experts are looking down the road, whether the Senate will turn, whether the House returns. I don't predict things. I have no idea. But will that impact, for example, a Supreme Court justice retiring in anticipation of maybe the Senate losing? You're on the Judicial Committee, very important committee. By the way, one of the only non-lawyers on that. We need non-lawyers on that committee occasionally. Do you think you're going to come and play between now and the time you retire from the U.S. Senate?
Oh, it's very possible we could have a Supreme Court justice retire in this time frame. I hope it's just because you're ready to do it and not for a partisan reason, to be honest with you. And I'll give you a good example of why I find I just disdain that sort of decision making. Judge Wendt on the Fourth Circuit announced his retirement until the election results were different, and then he withdrew his retirement. That is a blatant partisan political act for a supposedly nonpartisan position. Now,
we're seeing that in the House occasionally too.
Some of our Supreme Court justices are getting up there in age, so I think that there may be a natural decision to move on, but I don't think it would be based on any sort of
the Ruth Ginsburg
prediction of the future.
The Ruth Ginsburg effect, maybe on the right side of the aisle.
Could be. Could be.
Are you getting ready for that? Are there people preparing for that possibility?
No, you can't prepare for that. That's just like you've got to be ready to go into the committee and see all the dynamic at the time. I'm sure it will be about as rowdy as the other 3 Supreme Court justices, the Republican Supreme Court justices. It'll make for good TV.
All right, the remaining 2 to 3 minutes, I want to talk about the state. You were Speaker of the House when I was governor. I loved our partnership, even when you were wrong. I loved our partnership. I really did, and we did a lot. I'm very proud of what we accomplished. The Senate and House can't get together a budget with the governor.
Yeah, that's
from looking from the outside in. I think we're the only state who hasn't passed a budget.
I think they're.
What feedback would you give them?
I think it's dangerous. You should never have gone out. I mean, we never in the 4 years that I was there, we never went beyond about June without a budget. We've got to do the CRs at the state level make no sense. They're inherently inefficient. They're actually mimicking bad behavior in Washington. Don't do that. Get together, resolve the issues, pass a budget, give North Carolinians certainty. And you know why? One of the reasons why we went from the 4th quartile to top 4 or 5 by any measure is that we provided certainty, legislative certainty on taxes, on regulations, and our own spending in our budget. We need to get that checked off.
The biggest race in North Carolina this year might not just be the Senate race between most likely Whatley and Cooper, but we actually have a primary race in March in Rockingham and Guilford County. Phil Berger, some would say the most powerful person in North Carolina government, versus the sheriff, the local sheriff there. What impact does that have, do you think, on North Carolina politics? And what do you see?
It's going to be fascinating. I think that Senator Berger may have received President Trump's endorsement.
He called him.
Sam Page is definitely beloved in that county. You know, he's a good guy. He strikes a kind of a Dudley Do-Right image, and he's a good, solid conservative. So it's going to be an interesting primary to watch. And I understand. I think the Berger campaign, or at least their supporters, have already spent millions of dollars before the filing, which suggests to me they consider Sam to be a serious contender.
What's next for Thom Tillis in a remaining minute? After this year.
More grandkids, more Susan, more family, and more business. I'm not going to quit. I'm going to go back into business and probably work another 10 or so years. But I'm looking forward to actually not having my calendar and everything dictated to me, to be able to work where I want to work, focus on things, and continue to play a role in supporting good candidates and targeting bad candidates.
Well, Thom, I want to personally thank you. You've been a friend, you've been a colleague, you've been a great public servant, and you've been ethical. And I'll tell you, that's something to be proud of with the time you've been in both state legislature and now the federal government. And thank you for being on Unspun, too. And we wish you the best for the future.
I enjoyed it. Let's have a great year.
God bless, buddy.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, tonight on our Unspun Countdown, the top 5 divisions within the Republican Party. Now, in a future show, we're going to talk about the divisions within the Democratic Party. But tonight, the divisions within the Republican Party, starting out with number 5. Number 5, of course, MAGA, Make America Great Again. These are the voters that will vote for Trump no matter what. The downside of this is some of those voters don't vote on off-year elections when Trump is not on the ballot. Number 4, America First. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene's now new motto, American First, America First. And these are the Republicans who don't want America involved in any wars overseas. They're more isolationist, and all of a sudden they're mad at some of the MAGA voters for not pushing the America First agenda. Number 3, the Reagan Republicans, the traditional Reagan-Lincoln Republicans. These are what used to be called the country club Republicans, but now they're kind of cast as outsiders. It's very interesting. Will they vote for Trump or will they stay home, especially during the off-year elections in the Senate North Carolina race? Number 2, the anti-Trump Republicans. They're big-time Republicans, but they dislike Trump. The question for them, will they stay home in future elections? And number 1, straight ticket Republicans. They don't care who's on the ballot. As long as they're a Republican, they're going to vote for the Republican. All right, time now for Unspun, 1-on-1. Andrew Dunn, a journalist turned political strategist, joins me now as our special guest on Unspun, 1-on-1.
Thanks for having me on. You know, I enjoyed your top 5. Where do you think you fit in
among
that
the
list?
top 5 divisions within the Republican Party?
That's right.
Probably all 5, according to some critics, but I've probably always been more of a Reagan Republican. I used to say I was an Eisenhower Republican, which goes way back. I was actually a young man when he was president, but I was an Eisenhower Republican because I believed in infrastructure. But Reagan had this positive attribute about him that made me change to the Democratic to the Republican Party when I was just out of college moving to Charlotte.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly been a ton of changes in the Republican Party since you've been in elected office. But I wanted to start with something from Senator Tillis's interview. You know, he, in his statement announcing he wouldn't seek re-election, he said, quote, "It underscores the greatest form of hypocrisy in American politics. When people see independent thinking on the other side, they cheer. But when those very same people see independent thinking coming from their side, they scorn, ostracize, and even censure them." Now, Governor, you've plenty of experience with that at both the city and the state level. How much truth do you see in what Senator Tillis said, and how should leaders navigate that tension between party loyalty and doing what they believe is right?
Well, Tom is dead on. I call it the purity test. You know, every party has this, they ask you 10 questions, and if you get one of them wrong, they'll say you're not a real Democrat or a real Republican, and you better not go work the other side. And yet they tell the public, the general public, that I'm going to go work across the aisle. But when they get a threat of leadership, either from the president or their congressional leader, what you don't know behind the scenes is you actually are threatened. If you go jump to the other side in these congressional negotiations in D.C., you will have a primary or will cut all your money off in the future. So it's almost a quid pro quo threat. It's a blackmail type of threat that's occurring in politics like we've never seen before.
So what's harder to do, to battle the opposition party or to take a stand against your own party?
Well, a lot of it depends whether you're in a safe district or not. And what's ironic is most congressional people live in a safe district or work in a safe district. Yeah. But that's why they're even more afraid of getting hit from either the left or the right in a primary. It's those people who tend to work across the aisle are the ones in a competitive state or a competitive district in the general election. But because of gerrymandering in the Congress, you don't have many of those anymore, including right here in North Carolina. And in the Senate, all but one or two races are competitive races, even in the U.S. Senate, and that's a big change now.
Yeah.
So that dynamic has kind of flipped during the last 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you had it right when you said divisions in the Republican Party. And I think naturally parties are always going to have some differences of opinion or even factions. And I think that can be healthy. But I think we're at a point now where we have gone to division that's unhealthy. How do we get back to, allowing some disagreement within the Republican Party?
Well, I think part of the problem is we also have division in the media. So people are only listening to their silo. And therefore, it's hard to reach outside the silo of whether it be Fox News or CNN News, because they're talking to the audience that wants that person to represent them. And so we're actually more politically segregated than ever before, partially due to the politicians, but also due to the media and what the viewer wants from the media. And now social media is segregated all the way due to what do we call when the social networks
the algorithm.
The algorithms. So the algorithms will tell you immediately whether or not you're a conservative or a liberal or a socialist or a communist or whatever, and they'll only send you information that you want to hear. And I think that's one of the big things that's causing some of the dilemmas of working together on the Hill now or in Raleigh.
Yeah, I think you're right. I might add one more division to your list. There's political figures who focus on short term and political figures who focus on the long term. How, in your career, how did you strike a balance between short-term priorities versus long-term priorities?
Well, my fault politically was I probably concentrated too much on long-term, and it cost me the next election. And the dilemma is, the dilemma in business right now, people look at the next quarterly report on whether or not you're doing a good job. Now people are looking at, can you win the next election? And can I raise money for the next election? And that's what it comes down to, is raising money. So a lot of people are thinking short-term battles will raise me money, especially on controversial issues, because it'll get you on TV more. And you see that with Marjorie Taylor Greene, you see that with Donald Trump, you see that with AOC. Both parties now know how to get on TV. Yeah. And usually you're not talking about a long-term problem, you're talking about a short-term controversial issue in politics.
Yeah. We've just got about a minute left. I wanted to ask you, Governor Jim Martin just had his 90th birthday. I believe you've talked with him recently.
I went to his party.
Yeah. How was that? And what have you learned from Governor Martin, how he's dealt with all these issues?
First of all, I think he was the smartest governor we've ever had. And the smart thing that he did that I didn't do is when he was governor, he picked 3 battles and focused on education, transportation, economic development. That was it. Anything else he wouldn't talk about. I didn't do that. I picked more than 3 battles. And I really credit Governor Martin for doing a great deal for Mecklenburg County as a county commissioner, being a U.S. congressman, and being a great governor. And happy birthday to Jim Martin.
That's right. Happy birthday.
And thank you very much for being our guest journalist today on Unspun.
Yeah, thanks for
Appreciate it.
having me.
Thank you very much. You know, one would think that the most impactful primary race this year would be for the U.S. Senate in March, now that Thom Tillis is not running for re-election. Well, it's not. The most important primary election in North Carolina is for a state Senate seat in Rockingham and Guilford counties. The seat is currently held by Republican Phil Berger, the president of the Senate, and without question, the most powerful politician in North Carolina during the past 15 years. The Senate president isn't just another legislature. He's the traffic cop for every major bill, budget, and policy decision in the state. A challenge to that role is a challenge to the system itself. His opponent, popular Republican Sheriff Sam Page, who argues that Phil has lost touch with his constituents back home in Rockingham County. Page points to Berger's push for a gambling casino in Rockingham County despite overwhelming opposition from local residents. Berger has already spent over $1 million on negative campaign ads against the sheriff, and they've landed with all the impact of a damp firecracker. But now, President Trump has endorsed Phil Berger. The president has endorsed a state Senate candidate, despite also saying that Sheriff Sam Page is a great guy. And in classic Trump fashion, he's trying to have it both ways, even dangling a job in Washington if Sam will just step aside. The sheriff is not backing down. So what's really going on here? Is the president rewarding Berger for engineering an additional Republican congressional seat? You think? Yep, the answer is yes. This is hardball politics, and not in a governor's race, not in a congressional race, not in a Senate race, but over a single state Senate seat. We've never seen anything quite like this in North Carolina, because if Phil Berger loses, the entire power structure in Raleigh shifts overnight. Budget priorities, legislative strategy, and political alliances all get rewritten. And if you're wondering what that says about the year ahead, buckle up. Well, that's the truth as I see it. I'm Pat McCrory, and thanks for watching Unspun.
A production of PBS Charlotte.